To get us started off, I'm going to use a definition that I came across, which is health is a state of complete physical, mental and social well-being, and not merely an absence of disease or infirmity. That's been used a lot here in Bristol over the last few weeks with the Healthy City Week and various other things going on. And I'm joined here in the studio today by Elliot and Karen, who have their own life experiences to be able to share, and their expertise in various fields to do with mental health. So first of all, Elliot, could I just pass across to you, and if you'd just like to introduce yourself, please.
Sure. So I'm Elliot Hall, and for the past 10 years I've run an organisation in Bristol called Ujima Music, and they provide music workshops and musical kind of activities for people suffering from mental health problems.
Okay, thanks very much. And Karen, yourself, what would you...
Hi, I'm Karen. I'm 59. And I've got a lot of experience being in and out of addictions and rehabs, etc. And I think that has a lot to do with mental health.
Okay, thanks very much, Karen and Elliot. Just to carry on from that, one of the things that I was doing when I was doing the background reading for this is some of the definitions. And I won't absolutely snow you under with all sorts of details and the thousands of pages of statistics there are. The definition of, by most people, for mental health, what do we mean by mental health? And it's often defined as a state of well-being. Well, what do we mean by that? It's that every individual realises his or her own potential, can cope with normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. It's quite a long list there. Karen, have you got any kind of opinions on that? What do they mean, do you think, by realise their own potential, normal stresses of life? What do you mean by normal stresses of life?
Well, I really believe that we all deserve the right to push ourselves to our own potential and limits. And I have a brilliant saying: we have no limitations. I don't like limiting myself.
Okay, so that sounds good. So what you're trying to say then is that you've just got a general enthusiasm for doing things.
Absolutely, yeah. I do believe that we should all reach our potential, and I don't like to limit myself.
That sounds interesting. And Elliot, you started to mention there about music, and I've heard something about drumming. Is that something that's important to you?
Yeah, well, so a lot of the workshops that we do, particularly when we're working with people with no previous musical experience, we often use African drumming because it's just immediately accessible to everyone. Everyone can participate in it. It's a great way of bringing a group of people together. It's also quite a physical activity, and it's just a good way of bringing a group of people together who don't have any experience.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't go along with everybody there because I happen to know what my own timing is on drumming, and you really wouldn't want to listen to me. Karen, when you say you do activities and things like that, do you go outside? Do you use nature? Do you go inside with music? Or?
Do you know, I'm so lucky. My back garden looks out onto Backwell Hills and the fields, and I take my dog down walking every day, and I just absolutely adore it. And I go up into the woods, and I just appreciate so much the beauty that is right on my doorstep. I am just the luckiest person.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely fantastic. I mean, a lot of people do talk about this thing about getting out. It was noticeable with that lovely guy that was on the radio, not this radio, but the other Radio Solent last week, Bill Palmer. I don't know whether you heard him, at 95 years old. He picked up the phone to the local radio station up there because they've got live phone system, which we haven't here at Ujima. And his wife, unfortunately, they got married after 30 years of being friends, and they actually got married relatively recently when they were kind of in their 80s and things like that. And she was into a nursing home after a fall, and he was just feeling lonely at home. It was that isolation side that got him. Elliot, have you experienced any of that side with the isolation?
Well, for a long time before I got involved in Ujima Music, I was very ill with schizophrenia, so I pretty much lived inside of a psychiatric hospital for 10 years nearly, when I was younger. So at that time, you know, it's a strange feeling because you're around people all the time, but yet you're incredibly isolated and cut off from the rest of society. And certainly when you move out and try and reintegrate with society, it's very, very difficult because you're very isolated from the rest of society.
So, I mean, if you're in that kind of situation, do you get the impression that you felt that it was safer inside that environment rather than being outside? Was it a lot of effort to get out?
Well, to be honest, I always, you know, whether when I look back on it, I think, you know, being in a hospital with having people look after me was by far the most damaging thing that ever happened to me. And just picking up on something that you said earlier, we were talking about the definition of mental health. You know, saying the thousands of pages reminds me of a program that I was watching recently, and it was a really interesting program because it was called Making a Killing, the future of psychotropic drugs. And what was interesting about it was a lot of the people being interviewed used to work for pharmaceutical companies, but they're kind of given it up because of the morality of it. And they were asked about mental health. They were asked about the definitions and stuff. And they said, look, what happens is we come up with a drug, we make a drug, and then we make an illness for it. So we used to have, and he was saying that he used to have 100 pages in this medical definition dictionary that's now swelled to 1,000 or something. And it was quite, and what he was saying was quite interesting, that we need to sell these things, and so the amount of definitions that we increase. So, for example, we would have something that somebody who used to be shy years and years ago may now be said to have a social anxiety disorder and get treated in a certain way and move through the system, whilst we would probably just years ago have accepted that person as shy or quiet. So we tend to give everything a label these days, and so the group of people that we define as having a mental illness is kind of swollen so much.
I'd just like to follow up on that. A quick statistic: 1 in 4 of us do have an issue with mental health. There are some horrifying statistics out there about all the way through, but we are back to what do you mean by it? Is it the stresses of work making you upset? And Karen, to follow on from that, do you have any opinions on this thing about what you've kind of labelled as somebody? I'm normally labelled as a depressive. Doesn't sound like it in my voice today, but I am.
I know that in 2010 February, my partner died. Raymer, he was only 49. He had HIV-related illnesses. We're both HIV positive, and I was diagnosed in 1997, and I think that affected my mental health big time as well. 4.5 years later, I met my partner Raymer, and we were together 8 years and 3 months before he finally died in February 2010, and that left me extremely isolated and depressed, and I really went through a really bad few years that followed, and I isolated. I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want to meet anybody. I did my shopping and ran home as quickly as I could. And it took quite a while. In fact, I got a dog to force me out of bed, you know, and she did, because I had the responsibility of a dog, and I had to get up and get out walking. So she was a lifesaver.
Yeah, it does force you out when you get this pathetic little whine from the corner of the room with your dog saying, "Please take me for a walk."
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting, your comment about isolation. I do know that I'm going to be giving out some numbers and some contacts later in the programme. But Karen, you work quite closely with a particular organisation that is focusing on the older people, which is actually one of our issues that we've got running nationwide at the moment.
That's
just
right.
Explain something about that.
Yeah, it's Bristol Aging Better, and they formed a partnership with Aardman Animations, and we made an animation of people aging, and I was a bungee jumping, giggling, grunting pig. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was a privilege to work with Aardman and Bristol Aging Better.
If our listeners out there do get a chance to be able to see anywhere the Aardman cartoon with Bristol Aging Better, there are a number of stars and the voices are absolutely brilliant, and the cartoon itself is exactly what you would expect from Aardman. And I do admit that one of my favourites is the bungee jumping pig. Just to go back to that kind of side of it, the isolation and things like that, I came across a piece this morning in one of my bits of research, which I'll just read out, which is very, very similar to the way that I think in certain periods, which is, when I'm upset, I shut myself down. I have no motivation for anything. I can tell myself that nobody cares, even though I know some do. And that kind of attitude about reaching out is quite difficult when you're in a certain way of state of mind. And it is one of the things that at Bristol Aging Better and various other organisations in the city, we do try and reach out to those people in isolation. Do you have anything to say about that, Elliot, about how you could reach out, or how people that are in isolation could reach out to other people?
Well, I think it's the first thing is trying to provide an environment where people can actually feel comfortable, and feel comfortable with a lot of isolation comes, I think, because people feel vulnerable or upset, and they feel that they can't go out, they can't connect, because they've got nowhere to be unless they don't feel like that. So one of the things that kind of Mighty Music that we do is that we take people that and provide a supportive environment for them to be, and they don't have to be in a great condition when they get there. You know, our basic job is to make sure that when they leave us at the end of the day, they're in a better position than when they started. And what we try and do is to keep it focused around making music, so people have something else to talk about rather than the things that they're affecting them. Because sometimes just to be able to have a break from all the stuff that's in your head can be a therapeutic value in itself.
I personally totally agree like that. I could talk to myself and kind of bury myself underneath my own information. We're coming very close to the adverts now, so I'm just kind of recap that we are covering mental health issues today, both the minor things like the stresses of travelling to work or being in work, which would be quite difficult, and we're going a little bit further after the break for the ads into what we actually mean by the stresses and strains of life, which is what with often of us actually puts us into an issue with mental health. Though there are, of course, also the physiological sides where there's actually a genetic issue or something like that, often easily identifiable, and possibly whatever some of us have opinion of pharmaceuticals can be actually reduced by having pharmaceutical systems. Welcome back to the Babbers Show here on Ujima Radio 98 FM. It's hosted today by me, JK, and we've got two guests in the studio already, which is Elliot and Karen, and we're discussing the issues focusing on mental health, and we've been talking generally around the subject as to how we do bits and pieces like drumming and going out and walking the dog to kind of get ourselves out of isolation and keep ourselves fit and well from the mental health point of view, as well as the physical side, because it's all together. You've got to consider the whole person approach. And we've just been joined by Bob, who's a practicing therapist to do with these type of issues and a lot of others, a very experienced person on this, and he's going to make a contribution as well. Over to you, Bob.
Hi, yes. I wanted to pick up on Elliot's point about labelling I think it's really interesting with labelling, because for some people it can be a huge help, and some people it can be a big stumbling block. And for somebody who's suffered something in the mental health field for a long time and not known what it is, somebody diagnosing it and giving it a label can be a huge relief to them sometimes, because they thought they were abnormal or something like that. And so it's something that they can sort of define and sort of work on. On the other hand, I've seen other people who've become somehow a victim of the label as well. So I think labels are helpful and unhelpful. That's the point I wanted to make. And you were asking at the beginning of the program about defining mental health issues and trying to kind of put them into words. And one of the most helpful descriptions of depression, for example, I've ever heard is the absence of vitality. So I like the way of saying what it's not rather than what it is, because it leaves it just a bit more room for it to move around then and be whatever it means to the individual.
That's very true. Some of our listeners might be aware that I've been turning up quite a lot to do with mental health issues on TV and radio over the last few weeks. And that vitality thing is very true. I've been speaking to a few people about how I turned myself around to where I am today. And a lot of it is to do with waking up in the morning and actually wanting to get out of bed and go and do something. It might be prearranged, or I might have got a couple of hours off, and then I'll go maybe even a walk around Castle Park, or I might go sailing because I've got access to boats down on the docks. And it's that, as you say, vitality and things like that. Karen, have you got anything to say about that?
I think it's absolutely right. It's absence of vitality. I like that description. Yeah, that's made me think deeply about it now. I like that, absence of vitality.
Okay, thank you, Karen. So that's your side of it, Elliot.
I think it's a really, really kind of accurate description. And one of the difficulties is that when people don't have that vitality, often then it's how can you get it back? Because if you don't want to get out of bed, and if you don't want to do that, then often how you get that back is engaging in positive, meaningful activity, which is very difficult if you feel that you can't get started on that. So that's always, for me, is the kind of the tipping point, really, is how you can get people to engage in those first instances into stuff to give them some of that vitality back, because it's very difficult to think it back. You know, it's normally doing an activity or doing something positive that makes you feel it, rather than, you know, being able to just think, okay, hope that this day will arrive out of nowhere, where you all of a sudden feel like you can do things again, when the reality is by engaging with things, they make you a bit stronger, if they're the right kind of things, you know, and then gradually that vitality grows. So yeah, it's I think it's a really good description, and it's a really good way of seeing some of the problems that are there with depression and what the real problem is, because it's trying to get people to re-engage with life, and that's very difficult to do. It's a bit like saying to somebody, you know, well, you need to climb this mountain. It's going to make you feel great when you get there, and you know it will, but you've got a 10-ton weight strapped to your back as well, you know.
That's very true. It is, as you're kind of saying there, it's small steps to be able to get up a big mountain. Bob, I can see you nodding there. Is there anything else you'd like to say on that point?
I agree with Elliot. That working with somebody to get them to make that first step is really difficult, and no matter how many suggestions you might make, it needs something to happen, I guess, in the brain chemistry of the individual to make that first step. And I think what you said in terms of very small steps to start with in terms of confidence building is often the way, rather than make that huge leap straight away, because if that fails, then there's a big come down after that. So little steps, layers on layers on layers of building of confidence, support from other people, planning what you're going to do the day before is really important, because you've got more chance of getting out of bed and doing it without thinking, rather than waking up in the morning and saying, what shall I do? It's easy to fall back into the old pattern. So all those things, and of course everybody's different. Everybody's got to find their own pathway through this, but the point is to keep trying, I think.
That's very true when you say about everybody being different. Not every pathway that we're describing here in the studio today is going to be necessarily each listener's pathway. In fact, the chances are it won't be. And it's a case of exploring the options. There are a huge number of options out there. And if you do feel that you need to actually go and talk to a medical expert, please do go to your doctor or GP, who might be able to point you through into the direction of the various groups that are out there, like Lift Psychology, Mind. And if it's really difficult for you, there are of course the Samaritans. I will be doing the numbers for those institutions organisations after the break of the news. And this kind of gently approach is very, very important, especially to those that are massively isolated, because it's quite difficult to even open the front door to somebody. And that little step, and again I'll refer to this 95-year-old last week, he picked up the phone to somebody. I actually, a couple of years ago, I was talking to my sister and she picked up that my voice was wrong over the phone and came and saw me. It's quite small steps, because even just going out and talking to somebody different, a stranger, might be easier or more difficult. And Karen, have you got anything about that to do with talking when you're in isolation itself?
It's really difficult, and I had a lot of difficulty around asking for help as well. I like to think I'm really independent and I don't need other people, but the truth is that we none of us are an island, and we all need somebody, and there's so many people out there, especially in Bristol, that are willing and able to help, and it is a case of just asking.
Yeah, and that point about being older, I think that we do get to the point where, I mean, I'm 60 now, and I won't say the ages of the other people in the studio. I'm kind of confident of my own ability to be able to make a choice in my own mind, but obviously I'm not in other ways, because I ended up where I was a couple of years ago. And it's making the choice as to who you're going to see, what you might be able to do. And that spark of interest that I think it was Elliot mentioned, kind of trying to find something that would just get you to go out and try something small. Bob reinforced that, as to where we can go, what we can do. Because with me, it's nearly always outside in nature. And okay, on holiday I went for long walks, but round here in town it might be only 10 minutes to get to the local co-op. It's all just that little thing of getting out of isolation, which is so important to us. In general health, which is all tied up very much with the mental health side. And I'm about mental health today, and just an interesting couple of facts from what we've already covered about things. And I've been reading the World Health Organization bits and pieces of facts and figures, and one of them is stigma and discrimination against precincts of families prevent people from seeking mental health care. That is right at the top of the 10 issues that the World Health Organization have. We've got various bits on this morning's news that I was listening to, various TV programs and radio stations. It's almost 1 million people a year commit suicide worldwide. There's all sorts of issues to do with age as well. We've already touched a bit about the older person, which is a large group of the issues with quite serious health issues mentally. But there's also over 20% of children and adolescents have major problems, major disorders. And they are the leading cause of disability worldwide and here in the UK. They're massive, massive issues. And it's not just the stress of getting on the bus and going to work, though that's obviously important. You've got to kind of have a reserve to be able to cope with the small stresses of life. Karen, how do you do that? How do you kind of keep a reserve to keep you going?
Well, it's difficult, but once you do take those baby steps and you are improving, it just gets easier, and getting out with the dog is one of my favourite things. And just watching something, putting a seed into the earth and watching it grow and develop is miraculous, and just being out in nature and watching everything growing. I love the spring to see the start of the new season and the growth. It's just beautiful.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I do find actually helping out up at Feed Bristol, which is part of Avon Wildlife Trust's thing, which is all part of West of England Nature Partnership, which is a huge amount of nature stuff going on, which as a farmer's boy possibly I appreciate more than some. But it does have a massive impact, as you say, watching things grow. To me, it's a slowing down of life. Do you have any opinions on this slowing down of modern life at all, Elliot?
I think it is very difficult because we're driven at such a pace, and we have to do. People are under such strain to have to do so much stuff just to survive. So, for example, people sometimes have to work so many long hours. After work, that means they don't have time to cook, to eat the right food. They don't have time to do that sort of thing. So sometimes to actually just disengage from that a little bit and take to something that's a little bit slower and a little bit more nourishing. And the kind of paradox is often you do get more done anyway that way, because it's not just about the amount of hours that you're doing, but it's how efficiently you're working as a human being. And we all work better when we're happier and more well balanced. So we often think, well, we haven't got time to look after ourselves. We haven't got, but sometimes it's just reevaluating that and putting that as one of the first things rather than the thing that we squeeze in if we can, you know.
Yeah, that's true, but I'm not sure for myself. I tend to like slow music. I'm not sure going to a frantic gig down in Statescroft would be a way for me to relax, particularly from stress. Bob, do you have any comments about this de-stressing idea, how you would slow down necessarily?
I think it's for me it's something getting away from the media, I think, because I think the media is constantly telling me who I should be, what clothes I should wear, what car I should drive, what holidays I should take, what food I should eat. And no matter how impervious to it I think I am, I know some of it goes in. So I quite like going away where there's no television, no phone, a couple of books, and I just love that. And it's not lonely for me. It's called solitude, and it's very refreshing.
Yes, that's an interesting point you make there. It's come up in my kind of last 10 years of talking to a lot of people within therapy and things like that, is the distinction between being alone and being lonely. I often feel most lonely when I'm actually in a crowd of people, especially if I don't know them at all. Or even if they are people I vaguely know and they're trying to be over helpful, I then again feel lonely. Alone to me is my best place is halfway up a mountain north of the Arctic Circle or halfway across the Atlantic. That to me is not lonely, because if I'm out in nature I can see the whales and things like that. Elliot, do you have anything about this, whether you kind of, when you're in a music session, I see that you're actually up for a music session at the moment, coming in on the grain barge on November the 19th in the evening in aid of Mind Your Music. Do you have any things about whether you do alternative things other than music?
Yeah, I mean, so in the past, one of the really key things to my recovery was I did a lot of meditation and also yoga. And I'm a great if I have to drive because I have to carry kit around, that's pretty much the only time I drive. I love to walk, and I love to kind of be outside. So I love to be physically active, and often when the body is busy walking and stuff, often the mind is calm, and things like nature. There's so much going on in such a beautiful way that it can just take your mind away from the difficulties that you're experiencing. So yeah, there's a lot of, also I absolutely love cooking. That's my bond. I'm terribly domestic at everything else, but cooking is something I really, really love to.
I totally agree on that. Yes, I love going out and finding some really good fresh ingredients. I tend to use very simple peasant cooking, don't ask for anything fancy. Karen, you've been kind of talking about walking the dog as being one of your prime therapies. Is there anything else that you do that's kind of noticeably different from being outside in nature?
I love reading, and I'm a keen herbalist, I like growing herbs and discovering the medicinal value of what I grow. And I also did a 2-year course at Trinity Church up in Old Market. I'm working with Charlie and Anita in the allotments there, and we learnt so much about the medicinal values of herbs and edible plants. It was a brilliant course, and I need to get back there and learn some more.
So we are all talking here about using different approaches, and even one person is kind of like me saying, I like being inside in the studio here and doing this, which I find very invigorating, albeit terrifying, and also going out in nature alone, sailing and things like that. Welcome back to the Babbers Show here on Radio Ujima 98 FM. You're listening to JK here, and we're focusing on mental health issues today. 2 guests in the studio right from the beginning, which is Karen and Elliot. Bob, who joined us shortly afterwards, who's a practicing therapist to do with mental health and various other similar issues. If any of the issues here raised have given you any concern for yourself, of one of your family or friends like that, the obvious organisation to contact that everybody has in mind in this country is the Samaritans. And so I'm going to read out their number because it is relatively new. It's not the old 800 number that at the age of 60 I think of. If you call 116123, I'll say that again, 116123. There's some lovely people at the other end that will be able to help them. And that is a phone number that will not turn up on your phone bill. So one of the barriers is embarrassment or fear of being found out talking about this type of issue. It doesn't turn up on your phone bill, so you can quite happily talk to them at any time. There's also a local number for their St Nicholas Street office, which is open from 7:30 to 9, and that's 0117 983 1000. I'll say that again, 0117 983 1000. You've got Lift Psychology, which is usually accessed through the GP surgeries. They've also got their own phone number, again 0117, and they're on 9823209. And Bristol Mind, which is down in Old Market Street, here in Old Market in the centre, and they're on 9800370. And don't hesitate to talk to your GP or anything like that. There were some very interesting stories out last week about teenagers being so embarrassed about bullying at school and things like that they simply weren't prepared to talk to anybody. And I'm just thinking of schools, there are lots and lots of people within the schools. There's people with the specialist knowledge to do with that. Bob, have you got any comments about things that spring to mind when people are talking about what I would call the common, like depression and anxiety and things like that, which is the 2 big ones in this country, about what I would call talking therapies? We've talked about going out into nature, we've talked about walking the dog, we've talking about going out on drumming and doing music. What about things like CBT and the talking therapies?
I think, again, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all. Some people respond to dance movement therapy, for example, because sometimes they have no words to describe what's going on for them. Therefore, it's sometimes easier to move it. Talking therapy, it can help other people. But it is about finding the right therapist for you, and there's a growing school of thought for many years now. It doesn't really matter whether it's CBT or whether it's transactional analysis. What matters is the relationship you have with your therapist. And in fact, there's the University of West of England training for counsellors. The key word there is the therapy is in the relationship with the therapist.
Yes, I will totally agree with that. It took me a long time and a number of therapists before I got through to the person that I could talk to. Part of it was to do with similar interests in activities, and partly because he is somebody, or she is somebody I totally trust. And that trust element is very important. Karen, have you got any comments on that side of it?
I think you're right. Trust is so important. I've done a lot of rehab, and group therapy work as well as one-to-one counselling, and it's so important that trust element is there. People find it so difficult to open up if they don't trust the person to whom they're speaking. So yeah, my experience with group therapy, I loved it. I really enjoyed it.
And Elliot, your opinion on that?
I think that talking treatments can be useful, but I do really believe a lot of what you were saying, that the relationship is incredibly important. Just in the same way, when we form friendships with people, we don't all gravitate to the same people. Some people, and it's important when we're thinking about a mental health problem, or still remembering that fundamentally we're still dealing with a person, and with a person that will take to some people that won't take to another person. And sometimes when there's an illness involved, there's a tendency to just forget that there's a person there, that we have likes, preferences, desires, things we enjoy, things we don't. And the issue of, as well as trust, of respect, so that there's a respect that goes both ways. So I think sometimes with a therapist, it's also remembering that, hold on, in one sense you're also kind of employing them. So you have to find the right person, like an interview for a job. Is this person going to be the one going to help me with my life? And do I respect them enough? Do I respect their opinion? And the same vice versa. And when that relationship is good and there's a mutual respect, you're starting from a place that is, going to allow good stuff to grow. But if there's not much trust there, and you don't respect the person, it's much more difficult to be open in that kind of relationship.
I can see you nodding in the background there, Karen. Have you got anything to add to that?
No, I just totally agree with everything Elliot said.
Okay, that's fine. This thing about the two-way trust and everything else, you've got to bear in mind that some groups are run as groups where you're invited along, and some groups you're actually told to go along. And I've just been noticed that we've got Rise coming up. It's the Rise Women up next after the hour and our break. So we've been covering mental health. Don't forget that you can contact any of the organisations on the telephone. There's the various organisations that are dotted around the outer parts of the city as well as the inner parts. So we've got Lift with offices down in Hartcliffe and Knowle and things like that. And talk to your GP. They are amazingly nice people. They don't have much time, and they will rapidly refer you on, but they will get you started on the journey into that, how you can cope with either the small or the big issues of life that might give you a problem, because if you have an issue with mental health, it will go across into your physical health as well. Have you got any comments on that, Elliot?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the physical health and the mental health are so related. So I mean, what you're putting inside you, what you're eating every day, is going to have a massive impact on the way you feel. And I think the quicker we start to look at the whole person and the physical health and how it relates to the mental health, the better.
I totally agree with the diet bit. One of the issues I had with the physical diet a couple of years ago, when they were doing all sorts of things like MRI scans with me, he just said, clean up your act and don't eat quite so much garlic bread and ice cream, which was one of the things that I did. And I do have them as treats still. I haven't gone that far, but it is a kind of a balanced, healthy diet, balanced exercise and everything else. Don't go mad in the gym if you want to go and do exercise. Bob, would you like a last word on that side? Would you like a last word on that?
I think the food is very important, but as is the mind. In one of the things we were discussing earlier on was trying something new, trying something energizing that you might feel slightly nervous about, but that gives you energy. Maybe asking for support in doing that from somebody, but try something new. I think if you keep having a go, you'll find something that you'll develop a passion for, and that might be your vehicle out of the issues that you're suffering from.
So yes, exactly. Develop a passion for would be the ideal. It's what I have with sailing, which is why I'm going to be out the docks on Thursday all day. It is something where it's very, very difficult to do that first reaching out. If you are in isolation, please do so. Just talk to somebody. There are lots and lots of people there that are incredibly kind-hearted to be able to help you out. Various lists through Bristol Aging Better and things like that for those of us that don't. Thank you for listening.